Hi students, so we are at the beginning of week 3 and you have the first of your bibliography assignments due this week, so I just wanted to go through that with you. This is your syllabus. You can find that in D2L by going to Content, Table of Contents, Course Information, and here is the information on the bibliography. Your first bibliography covers the time period 1865 to 1919. So what I want you to do is think of a person who lived most of their life during that time period, not Abraham Lincoln because he died in April of 1865. And I want you to kind of research them and find 5 primary sources on that person. They have to be primary. So if you don't know what a primary source is, go back to week 1A and take a look at that. Because this is really a pretty straightforward assignment. I'm not looking for annotation. I'm not looking for anything written, no essay. I just want a bibliography, but they got to be primary sources. So that's key. And if you don't know what that is, take a look at that information and email me so I can help you. So you can pick someone, if this is new to you, pick a president, pick somebody who's given a lot of speeches, done a lot of writing. If you're more experienced, I would love for you to do someone who's from a more marginalized group, a little bit harder to research maybe, but maybe somebody who truly interests you. That's great. So you would find some primary sources for that person and format them into a bibliography. So occasionally I have students who don't know or remember what a bibliography looks like. This is just an example of a bibliography. It's a list basically with the information from the source. I'll be looking for the alphabetical order and I'll be looking for the hanging indent. If your autocorrect is getting in the way, just put a hard return at the end of the line. And then when you go to the next line, you should be able to indent to get this hanging indentation. So you've got your person in mind, you want to research them. What are you going to do? If you're doing someone pretty well known, or even someone who's not as well known, one of the easiest ways to start is just by Googling the words your person and the word primary source. So here's Paul Revere, which no one's going to do in this class because he's way earlier. So I've Googled Paul Revere primary source, and you get a whole bunch of lists of things. You have to use some discernment at this point because you really want your primary source to be from the person's lifetime. There's a really famous poem on Paul Revere that was written in the 1860s. So many decades after the Revolutionary War, almost 100 years in the Civil War, there's a poem called The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. That's not a primary source because it tells us a lot about what was going on in the 1860s and that kind of patriotism and that kind of look back into history and what was their perspective. But it doesn't tell us about Paul Revere at the time, which is what we really need for a primary source. So there's a whole bunch here, but you need to still really give this some thought. So if you click on something, this is a good start, and this gives you a list of things that you can look at that are primary sources from the Revolutionary War. That's great. Sometimes I'll have students then who cite this entire website. That's not what I want. I want you to cite a primary source itself, not just the entire website. Don't put this into a citation generator and have something come out that gives me like a list, because that's not what I want. If you do a little bit more digging, here we find that this is a letter. This is a letter that Paul Revere wrote. That's excellent. That's a primary source. So how are we going to cite this? We are going to cite it as a letter. So here's a citation guide. I'll give you this link, and it just gives you some formats for different types of things that you will have to cite. So this is the letter one. Note refers to footnote, so you can ignore that. We're just looking at bibliography, and you can see that this would be, in our example, Revere, Paul, and then his name again and the person he wrote to, the place and date. So each of these different types of primary sources, if it's a photograph, if it's a speech, there's different formats for each of those things, and I'll be looking for those different formats. So make sure you're taking a look at that. If you are lucky enough to find something at the Library of Congress, which is a great site, along with the National Archives. There's a lot of primary sources available there. This is an engraving that Paul Revere actually did. We might want to check the date on that. Here it says right here, 1770. That's great, because sometimes there are more modern illustrations that aren't primary. If you find that at the Library of Congress, you've got a shortcut here. There's a little tab that gives you the citation.